My name is Melissa Powell, and I'm the Global Program Manager for Design Experts here at Google. I am currently running the global program for Design Experts, and I also teach the Sprint Master Academy externally within the community. And it's a personal passion to spread best practices around collaboration, because I believe that together, through business, design, and engineering, we can work together to create incredible products. I'm extremely inspired by the community and the work that they've done to help both within their own teams and with the startup community in general, and I'm excited to see where the future goes. What do I think about human-centered design? Human-centered design is critical to any product that is meant to have a human as a user, and all too often we think about amazing technologies and the power that they can do, or we fall in love with some of our UI or pixels, and we're not thinking about the user at the end of the day. Design thinking and design sprint specifically helps reframe the challenge in terms of the user, what the user really cares about, and helps people build products that make people's lives better.
Can you tell more about the design sprint and design thinking?
The design sprint is a 5-phase framework that incorporates the best practices from business, design, and product strategy. And it helps people focus first on the problem before jumping into the solution. Our brains are wired to solve problems. We have to sometimes react quickly when we're confronted with an issue, but the design sprint helps slow that process down at the beginning so that you can focus on solving the right problem. When we solve the right problem, we can be sure that our solution is correct.
What have you been doing with the design sprint here at Google?
Internally at Google, teams have started to adopt the design sprint methodology across the board. Particularly in the last 4 years, we've seen a lot of momentum around using the methodology because it saves people a lot of time. I remember hearing from one of my colleagues saying that they had been working on a project for 6 months, and after those 6 months they discovered an issue with the products that made the project cancel. This could have been avoided had they spent more time identifying the problem they were solving and making sure that the solution they were creating was the right one. It also allows for teams that are working globally to come together and align on one specific vision. I ran a design sprint with a global team working out of 3 different offices, and in order to kick off the project and ensure that we were able to make a very tight deadline, we had to run a design sprint, align ourselves, and when we came back to our home countries, we knew exactly what everybody was working on, and we were aligned on the same vision. Running a design sprint is different when you're inside a large enterprise versus when you're at a startup. In a large enterprise, the biggest challenge is making sure you have the stakeholders in the room. And specifically, if you have people who are decision makers who can't be present for the entire design sprint, which happens frequently, I make sure to have them join in at specific times in the sprint, particularly for most of the understand phase at the very beginning, and then throughout at the end of each day for the subsequent days in the sprint. That way, when the team gets back and talks to the decision maker, they realize that they're all aligned on one vision, and the stakeholder isn't going to say, no, that was never part of my vision, I'm not going to approve that, let's go back to what I originally told you to do. In startups, I think that the challenge is time. So if you're concerned about running a design sprint and whether or not it's really the right thing to do, I don't think a design sprint solves every problem, and sometimes running your business as usual is okay. But if you continuously come to the same problem over and over again, and you're getting the same problematic results, you'll want to stop, get everybody together, and really put your heads down and try to solve the right problem. That's when I think that it's worth your time and you end up saving time rather than wasting it. If you'll go and listen to Kai Haley's talk from Google I/O, you'll hear how she has used design sprints to flex to meet the needs of her team and the schedules of her team. The question we often get is, do you have to run a 5-day sprint? If you talk to Jake Knapp or if you read his book, you'll see that statistically speaking, he has run many, many different lengths of sprints, and he's found that 5 days is the perfect amount of time. Now, I've had in-depth talks with him about my theory around the duration and what these 5 days mean. And the short answer is you can adjust the length of the sprint to meet the needs of your team. Just be aware that if you shorten the sprint to 2, 3, 4 days, any work that you are not completing with your team will fall onto you. So while you're running a sprint, you have all 5 people who are committed to solving the problem, working together, documenting, and finalizing prototypes. Anything that happens outside of that sprint is likely going to drag on a little bit longer. It's going to fall onto one person a little bit heavier. You're not going to get the collaboration that you get in those 5 days. That said, the majority of the sprints that we run within the community run between 2 to 4 days. And I would say that 4 days is a very, very calm and efficient way to run a sprint, and it allows for 1 day of recovery and recap. But often 4 days is still too much, and so even running a 2 or a 3 day sprint can make a lot of leeway to solving the problem. Another question that we often get is, how often should I run a design sprint? Should I run a design sprint every single day? Should I run one once a year? Is it only for the beginning of a sprint, or only for the beginning of a project? And to this I say it depends. It depends on the size of the problem. It depends on how well your current flow of work is effectively solving your problem. I was talking to a product manager here at Google, and he said there was 1 year that his team ran a different 4-day design sprint every week for the entire year without breaks. This is obviously not something that every team is able to do. What I would recommend is that you should run a sprint when it makes sense for you. And some of the indicators that you might have that a design sprint is necessary is you're hitting the same problem over and over again, or perhaps you have a global team and you need to align on one single vision. Or if you have a very, very tight deadline and you need to inject speed and you're having trouble finding the right direction. Design sprints are very effective at giving you focus. So I would recommend that you run a sprint when the need calls for it, not just because it's something that you've heard of before and it sounds exciting. It does take a lot of time, but it's very effective at helping the team focus and helping you solve the right problem. Another question we often get is, what happens when you go through the understand, sketch, decide, prototype, and validate stage, and you realize when you're validating with users that you've created something that people don't want? This is a great place to be. Rather than waiting a couple of months before finding this out, you now know within 5, 4, sometimes 3 days. But what do? So sometimes you can take that information, you now have a very solid understanding of your problem. You can take this information and jump into a second sprint very quickly. Rather than starting from the understand phase, start from the sketch phase and go right into sketching, deciding, prototyping, and validating again. This way you can leverage the information you have and keep up that fast momentum that a sprint allows you to have. Sometimes people want to know, I'm not a designer, what should I do on the prototyping day? And during the prototyping phase, there's actually a lot of work to be done. I would recommend that you divide your team up to divide and conquer the task at hand. The top 3 roles that you can have is prototyping, doing the visual design. You can also do documentation. And finally, you can prepare for the user interviews on the final day. In addition to those pieces, you can assign somebody to be a copywriter for what's going to appear in the UI. And you can have somebody maybe stitching everything together to make it a seamless one piece. Design is an art, and sometimes 8 hours doesn't feel like enough time to complete a prototype that you're comfortable putting in front of a user. But my favorite quote from a user researcher here at Google is, the fidelity of your idea should match the fidelity of your prototype. You shouldn't be spending more than 8 hours during a design sprint because you're not certain about the idea. I know that it's difficult to put that level of fidelity in front of an external user, But it's really important that you validate quickly and you validate early. If you need additional time, I recommend that you do it overnight so that you keep the pressure on yourself and on your team to meet the original deadline of one day. Google does a lot of efforts to try to educate developer communities on Google technologies and raise the technological bar around the world. But I think that it's really important to also share learnings about how to make those products really valuable to users. If I want to create a world that is filled with solutions that I'm proud to be part of, I want to help create a future that's brighter tomorrow. And so through that, I think one of the keys is collaboration, and design sprints is one piece to that puzzle. If you're interested in running a design sprint, I recommend that you reach out to Dr. Eunice Sari, who is a certified Google Certified Sprint Master, or you can go to developers.google.com/experts and search for Certified Sprint Master. And you can find other local experts who can share some of their knowledge. We're providing additional links for self-serve platforms, ways that you can learn yourself with free resources on how to run a design sprint for your team. Thank you.